The first time I saw St. Mercy Hospital, I understood why no one else wanted the job. It was a Tuesday morning in January, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache with each breath. I'd driven 3 hours into Appalachian, Ohio, watching the landscape shift from industrial decline to forgotten hollows until I found the access road Mr. Voss had described. The hospital appeared through bare trees like something from a fever dream, a Gothic revival monstrosity of blackened brick and limestone, 6 stories of empty windows staring down at nothing. Ivy had consumed the eastern wing entirely, creating organic patterns that looked deliberate, almost architectural. Broken glass glittered in dead flower beds. A rusted sign hung crooked near the entrance. St. Mercy Hospital, founded 1923. I'm David Reese. I'm 34 years old. 18 months ago, I was wearing a different kind of uniform, serving time in a minimum security facility for embezzlement. Not proud of it. Made mistakes when my marriage fell apart and the medical bills piled up. But I paid my debt, did my time, learned my lesson, all the things you're supposed to say. The problem is, a felony record transforms you into a ghost in the legitimate job market. Applications disappear into silence. Interviews end with tight smiles and "we'll be in touch" lies. So when a property management company offered me overnight maintenance at a condemned hospital in the middle of nowhere for $15 an hour, I didn't ask questions. I needed the work. I needed to prove I could hold down a job, follow the rules, stay clean. The irony of that last part wouldn't become apparent until later. Mr. Voss was waiting in the parking lot, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit, late 40s, with the nervous energy of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't shake my hand, just nodded toward the building and started walking, keys jangling in his grip. "Orientation will be brief," he said, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "The company's primary concern is preventing vandalism and maintaining basic structural integrity until the historical designation goes through. You'll work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Sunday through Thursday. You'll have access to the ground floor, administrative wing, and 3rd floor. Everything else is sealed." He paused at the entrance, a massive wooden door with a broken lock, mostly sealed. Inside, the lobby was a time capsule of institutional decay. A reception desk sat abandoned, 1987 calendars still hanging on the wall behind it. Chairs arranged in a waiting area that no one had waited in for 37 years. The air smelled of mildew, old paper, and something else. Something medical and antiseptic that shouldn't still linger after 3 decades. Voss walked me through the ground floor quickly, pointing out the maintenance closet, the breaker box, the areas I'd be responsible for cleaning. His explanations were perfunctory, rushed. He kept glancing at his watch, at the stairs leading to the upper floors, at the ancient elevator with its Art Deco gate. Then he handed me a key ring with 7 keys and a weathered 3-ring binder, its cover labeled in faded marker. Property Maintenance Protocol. "Everything you need to know is in here," Voss said. "Read it carefully, follow it exactly. No exceptions, no improvisations." For the first time, he made eye contact, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach tighten. Not concern, fear. The previous maintenance worker left suddenly. The one before that. He trailed off, shook his head. "Just follow the protocol." I opened the binder. Inside were 21 rules, handwritten on what looked like pages that had been added over years, maybe decades. Different hands, different inks. Some entries were neat and careful, others scrawled in desperate urgency. A few were barely legible, written in shaking hands or smudged by something I hoped was water. I read the first few. Rule number 1. Never enter the pediatric ward after 11 p.m. for any reason. Rule number 2. If you hear children laughing, leave your floor immediately. Do not investigate. Rule number 3. The elevator only goes to the 4th floor. There is no fifth floor. If the elevator offers a fifth floor button, do not press it. Exit immediately. Rule number 4. Do not make eye contact with anyone in vintage medical uniforms. They are not employees. I felt a smirk tugging at my lips. This was hazing, obviously, an elaborate prank on the ex-con janitor. I'd heard about this kind of thing, urban exploration communities creating fake rules for abandoned places, building mythology around empty buildings to make them seem more interesting than they were. Is this serious? I asked, holding up the binder. Voss's expression didn't change. Completely serious. Follow every rule exactly as written. Your predecessor didn't. We found him in the basement 3 weeks later. He checked his watch again. I need to leave. You start tonight at 10 p.m. Don't be late. And David, he paused at the entrance. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, remember that the rules exist for a reason. People who've worked here, people who've survived working here wrote those rules. Respect their experience. Then he was gone, walking quickly to his car, almost jogging the last few steps. I watched him drive away, tires spitting gravel, moving faster than the winding access road probably allowed. He didn't look back once. I stood alone in the lobby of St. Mercy Hospital, the binder in my hands, listening to the building settle around me. Groans of old timber, the whisper of wind through broken windows, the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness above. The rules were ridiculous, obviously, but I'd learned something in prison. When you're on the outside looking in, when you're the new person in an environment with its own history and hierarchies, you follow the established protocols, even if they seem stupid, even if you don't understand them. I'd follow the rules. How hard could it be? The first week was almost disappointingly mundane. I fell into a rhythm quickly. Arrive at 9:45 p.m., park in the empty lot where my Civic looked absurdly small against the hospital's looming facade. Unlock the front entrance, flip the breakers to illuminate the ground floor and administrative wing, the only sections with working electricity. Spend the next 8 hours cleaning, inspecting, documenting any changes in the building's structural integrity. The administrative wing became my domain, 2 floors of offices, file rooms, and meeting spaces, all frozen in time. Desks still held personal effects, coffee mugs with ancient residue, family photos behind dusty glass, a child's drawing taped to someone's cubicle wall. I found calendars from 1987, the last year St. Mercy operated. Someone had circled October 15th in red ink and written "Final Day" in angry capitals. Appointment scheduled for October 16th would never be kept. I cleaned methodically, following a routine the previous janitor had documented in a separate logbook I found in the maintenance closet. Monday, administrative offices, first floor. Tuesday, file rooms and conference spaces. Wednesday, administrative offices, second floor. The work was straightforward, almost meditative. Mopping floors, wiping down surfaces, checking for water damage or pest infestations. The building made noises, but old buildings always do. Pipes knocking in the walls. Wind howling through broken windows on the sealed floors above. The creak and groan of timber settling under decades of neglect. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the floor above, but I rationalized it as the same sounds echoing through empty corridors, acoustic tricks played by the architecture. The rules in the binder seemed increasingly absurd. Don't enter the pediatric ward after 11 p.m. Don't photograph room 407. If you see a doctor in a white coat, leave the building immediately. It read like a creepypasta, one of those fake, true-story horror tales teenagers shared online. I kept the binder in my maintenance closet, unopened after that first day. Then came my 8th night. A Wednesday in late January, temperature below freezing, wind shrieking around the building's corners. I was mopping the 3rd floor corridor at 10:47 p.m. The administrative wing extended to the 3rd floor in the south section. though most of the rooms up there were locked storage spaces. My task was simple. Clean the main hallway, check the window seals for ice damage, document any concerns. That's when I heard it. Children laughing. Not the distant echo of wind, not the creak of old timber. Children, multiple children, their laughter high and clear, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. It was coming from the direction of the sealed section, the pediatric ward. I stopped mopping, water pooling around my feet. The laughter continued, joined by other sounds, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the bounce of a rubber ball, small voices calling out in some game I couldn't quite distinguish. Rule number 2, if you hear children laughing, leave your floor immediately. Do not investigate. I remembered the rule, but I dismissed it just as quickly. Teenagers, probably. Urban explorers who'd found a way into the sealed sections. It happened at abandoned places like this. Trespassers looking for thrills, content for their social media channels. I should investigate. Make sure they weren't damaging anything or putting themselves at risk. That was part of my job, wasn't it? I continued mopping. The laughter grew louder, closer. It was moving through the sealed section, getting nearer to where the administrative wing connected to the rest of the hospital. I could hear the wheelchair wheels more clearly now, not one chair but several moving in coordination. The ball bounced with rhythmic precision. Bounce, 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 then silence, then laughter, then bouncing again. I kept working, but my movements had become mechanical. My hands gripped the mop tighter than necessary. The temperature in the corridor seemed to be dropping, my breath starting to steam. At 11:03 p.m. exactly, I know because I checked my phone. My mop water turned red. Not gradually, not a slow contamination from rust in old pipes. Instantly, the water in my bucket transformed from soapy gray to rust red, the color of old blood. It spread across the linoleum in patterns that weren't random, weren't the natural flow of liquid on a smooth surface. They were handprints, small handprints. The laughter stopped. The temperature plummeted. I could feel it happening in real time, a drop of at least 20 degrees in the span of seconds. My breath came in visible clouds. Frost formed on the windows with an audible crackling sound. And I heard a new sound behind me. Behind me, in a corridor I knew was empty, the wet slap of small, bare feet on the linoleum. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body had gone rigid with a primal fear I'd never experienced before. The footsteps came closer, closer. I could feel a presence immediately behind me, small and cold. Something touched the back of my hand where I gripped the mop, fingers child-sized, so cold they burned. I ran. I dropped the mop and ran for the stairs, my footsteps echoing through the empty building, chased by laughter that was no longer playful but triumphant, delighted. I didn't stop until I reached the ground floor, bursting through the stairwell door into the relatively warm air of the lobby, gasping, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my phone. I stood there for 20 minutes waiting for my heart rate to slow, telling myself it had been panic, imagination, acoustic tricks, and a coincidence with the water. But I couldn't make myself believe it. At dawn, when the winter sun finally penetrated the lobby's grime-covered windows, I forced myself to return to the 3rd floor. The mop and bucket were exactly where I'd left them. The water was clear again, just soapy and gray. The corridor looked normal in the morning light, dusty, abandoned, cold, but normal. Except for the footprints. Small, muddy footprints, child-sized, led from the sealed section's entrance to the exact spot where I'd been standing. They were everywhere. Dozens of overlapping prints, as if multiple children had crowded around me, watching me work. Then they stopped. Just stopped. In a perfect circle around where I'd dropped the mop. No trail leading away. No explanation for where they'd come from or where they'd gone. I took photos with my phone. Then I went to my car, retrieved the binder of rules from my maintenance closet and read it cover to cover. By the time I finished, my hands had stopped shaking. But only because I'd accepted something I couldn't rationally explain. Whoever wrote these rules had experienced what I experienced. This wasn't hazing. This wasn't urban legend. This was a survival manual. For 2 weeks after the incident with the children's laughter, I followed the rules with religious precision. I memorized all 21 protocols. I created a schedule that kept me in authorized areas during authorized times. I brought a watch with an alarm to ensure I never lost track of time. The building still unnerved me. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. But as long as I followed the rules, nothing else happened. The hospital seemed satisfied with my compliance, content to let me move through its corridors like a ghost haunting a ghost. Then I met Carmen. She appeared on a Friday night in early February, my 16th shift. I was in the ground floor lobby checking the main entrance lock at 11:30 p.m. when I heard voices from the East Wing. Male laughter, the click of a camera shutter, the bounce of conversation. I found 3 people in what had been the hospital's main corridor, 2 guys with flashlights and expensive cameras, and Carmen. She was maybe 26, confident in the way people are when they've never experienced real consequences. Urban exploration vest covered in patches, professional camera rig, portable lighting equipment. She smiled when she saw me, unbothered by being caught trespassing. "You must be the janitor," she said. "The security guard told us you worked overnights. Don't worry, we paid him $200 for access. We're not damaging anything, just taking photos." She gestured to her companions. "This is Jake and Marcus. We run an Urbex channel, Forgotten Ohio. 500,000 subscribers. St. Mercy is going to be incredible content." I should have called the police. I should have escorted them out immediately, but I was tired, and part of me, the part that still struggled to fully accept what I'd experienced, wanted to see how skeptics would react to this place. "You need to leave," I said. "This building isn't safe." Carmen laughed. "We've explored dozens of abandoned hospitals. We know how to be careful." She was already photographing the lobby, her camera's flash creating stark shadows. "The structural integrity is fine. And the legends about this place? That's what makes it perfect content. Our viewers love the haunted angle." "It's not just legends," I said. I pulled the binder from my bag. "There are rules for working here. 21 rules. You need to follow them or leave." She took the binder, flipping through it with Jake and Marcus crowding around. Their laughter started almost immediately. "Never enter the pediatric ward after 11 p.m., Jake read aloud in a mock-serious voice. "If you hear children laughing, leave immediately." This is amazing. The company actually created a whole haunted hospital mythology. Carmen was photographing the rules page by page. "This is perfect. Our viewers are going to eat this up. The creepy janitor's book of rules." She looked at me with something like pity. "Hey, no judgment, man. I know they probably make all the night workers read this stuff to keep people nervous and alert. It's like a corporate hazing ritual." "It's not," I started, but Marcus interrupted. "We should go to the 4th floor," he said, consulting something on his phone. "According to the historical records, that's where the surgical theaters were. Room 407 was the main operating room. Rule number 9. Never photograph room 407. If you do, destroy the camera immediately." "Don't go up there," I said, hearing the desperation in my voice. "At least read the rules first. There's one specifically about room 407, which makes it exactly where we need to go," Carmen said. She was already heading toward the stairs, her team following. "That's how this works. The places they don't want you to see are always the best content. Thanks for the concern, but we've got this." I followed them up. What else could I do? Call the police and wait 30 minutes for them to arrive in this remote location? Physically restrain them? I was exhausted, underpaid, and rapidly questioning my own sanity. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the rules were paranoid exaggerations and Carmen and her team would get their photos and leave unharmed, and I could go back to pretending I understood the laws governing reality. The fourth floor was worse than the third. While the administrative areas showed decay and abandonment, the fourth floor showed violence. Gurneys overturned in corridors, doors torn from hinges. Medical equipment scattered as if someone had ransacked the place in panic. The walls were stained with something that looked like rust but formed patterns too deliberate to be random. Handprints, full-body impressions, words and languages I didn't recognize. Carmen loved it. She was in constant motion, photographing everything, her enthusiasm growing with each disturbing detail. "This is incredible," she kept saying. "The staging is so good. Someone really committed to the abandoned hospital aesthetic." We reached room 407 at 12:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone, hoping it was still before midnight, hoping there might be some temporal loophole in the rules. The operating theater was massive amphitheater-style seating surrounding a central surgical area. Ancient equipment cast strange shadows in the beam of our flashlights. The smell was overwhelming. Antiseptic and decay, copper and something sweet and rotten. "Don't photograph in here," I said one last time. "Please. The rule says—" "The rule is to build mystique," Carmen said. She was already setting up her shot, adjusting her lighting rig. "This is literally why we're here." She started shooting. The camera's flash created a strobe effect, freezing the room in rapid bursts of light and shadow. Jake and Marcus spread out, getting different angles. I watched the photos appear on Carmen's camera screen as she worked. Standard urbex content, decaying medical equipment, atmospheric shadows, the drama of abandonment. Then the background started changing. At first I thought it was my angle, seeing the screen from the side. But no, in the photos, figures were appearing. People in hospital gowns standing in the amphitheater seating, just barely visible in the shadows. Nurses in vintage uniforms from the 1950s or 60s, their faces turned toward the camera. "Carmen," I said, "look at your photos." She glanced at the screen and shrugged. "Light and shadow. Creates all kinds of pareidolia, makes the photos creepier, which is perfect." But I could see them getting clearer, more defined. The figures were moving between shots, getting closer to the center of the room, closer to where Carmen stood. "We should leave," Marcus said suddenly. He'd stopped photographing, his camera hanging loose in his hands. "Something feels wrong." "5 more minutes," Carmen said. She was setting up a live stream now, her phone on a small tripod. "My followers are going to lose their minds over this location." The live stream started. I watched over her shoulder as the view count climbed. Hundreds, then thousands of people watching live footage of room 407. The comments scrolled past. "Someone's standing behind you." "There's a nurse in the background." "Get out of there." Carmen laughed, narrating for her audience, playing up the spooky atmosphere. She didn't see what I saw in the live stream. The figures in the background were no longer shadows or tricks of light. They were distinct, solid, moving with purpose. Patients, medical staff, all of them staring directly at the camera. All of them moving toward Carmen. The temperature dropped. My breath steamed. Carmen noticed it, incorporating it into her narration. "Even the temperature, it's like the room is responding to our presence. This is amazing." Then the live stream glitched. Video tore, the image fragmenting. When it stabilized, I saw something that made my blood freeze. On the central operating table, empty seconds before, was Carmen. Not the Carmen standing next to me, but Carmen lying on the table, surrounded by figures in surgical gowns undergoing some kind of procedure. The figure on the table had her eyes open, aware, terrified, her mouth moving in a silent scream. The real Carmen saw it too. Her narration stopped mid-sentence. The lights went out. Not just our flashlights and equipment. The ambient light from the windows, the faint glow from the hallway. Absolute darkness and silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then screaming. Carmen screaming in agony, screaming words I couldn't understand. I fumbled for my flashlight, found the switch. The beam illuminated the operating theater. Empty. No figures, no equipment running. But Carmen was gone. Jake and Marcus ran. I heard them clattering down the stairs, their panicked voices echoing through the building. I wanted to follow, but I couldn't leave without Carmen. I searched the 4th floor, calling her name. Nothing. I searched the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor, nothing. I found her in the basement at 1:43 a.m., 3 floors below where she'd vanished. She was lying on a rusted gurney in what had been the old morgue, catatonic, staring at the ceiling. Her camera was on the floor nearby, smashed beyond repair, but her phone was still recording. I played back the footage later after the ambulance came, after I'd given my statement to the police. The last clear video showed Carmen in room 407 just before the lights went out. But in the video, the room wasn't empty. It was full. Dozens of figures in surgical masks and gowns surrounding the operating table. And on the table was Carmen, visible through some impossible overlay of past and present. They were operating on her, their movements methodical, practiced. Removing something, installing something. She was aware through all of it, her eyes tracking the instruments, her mouth forming words. The video ended there, corrupted beyond recovery. Carmen spent 3 days in the psychiatric ward at the regional hospital. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling exactly as I'd found her. When she finally spoke, I was there. The police had asked me to try, since I was the last person to see her before the incident. I sat beside her bed and said her name softly. Her eyes moved to focus on me, and for a moment she was present, aware. "They're still operating," she whispered. "They never stopped. I can feel them working. They're removing something important. They're putting something new inside. They're very thorough, very professional. Dr. Holbrook says it's for my own good." Then she closed her eyes and didn't speak again. I left the hospital knowing something I hadn't wanted to admit. The rules weren't just about avoiding ghosts or respecting the dead. They were about preventing the past from claiming new patients. St. Mercy Hospital was still in operation. It had never closed. We were just walking through a memory of what it used to be. And sometimes the memory became real enough to claim new victims for procedures that never ended. After Carmen, I couldn't pretend anymore. I called in sick for 3 shifts, the first time I'd missed work since starting at St. Mercy. I spent those nights in my apartment, windows locked, lights on, researching the hospital's history with the obsessive focus of someone trying to rationalize the irrational. The internet gave me the surface details. St. Mercy Hospital, founded 1923, closed 1987, but I needed more. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, what Carmen had experienced, what the rules were protecting me from. On the 4th day, I drove to the county courthouse in Millfield, where the historical archives were kept. The records clerk, a woman in her 60s with skeptical eyes, directed me to the microfiche room in the basement. "St. Mercy Hospital, you said. You're the 3rd person this year asking about that place. Nothing good ever came from there." I spent 8 hours reviewing old newspapers, building inspection reports, legal documents, and witness statements. A story emerged, piece by piece, each revelation more disturbing than the last. St. Mercy Hospital was founded by Dr. Emmett Holbrook in 1923, positioned as a modern medical facility serving the rural communities of Appalachian, Ohio. The early years were unremarkable. A small hospital treating typical ailments, delivering babies, handling minor emergencies. The shift began in 1947 when Dr. Holbrook attended a medical conference in New York focused on emerging psychiatric treatments. He returned transformed, obsessed with what he called threshold medicine, the study of liminal states between life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, sanity and madness. Through the late 1940s and 1950s, St. Mercy's reputation changed. Dr. Holbrook began accepting patients that other facilities rejected: the mentally ill, the terminally sick, the catatonic. Many were involuntarily committed by families who couldn't afford better care or didn't understand the nature of Holbrook's treatments. The newspaper articles were buried in back pages, easy to miss. Questions raised about St. Mercy procedures. 1951. 3 patients die following experimental treatment. 1953. State inspector raises concerns. 1957. But Dr. Holbrook had political connections, donors, support from the medical establishment. The investigations faded. The hospital continued operating. Then I found the article from June 1962 that made everything click into place. Tragedy at St. Mercy. 12 children dead in pediatric ward. The official report blamed a tuberculosis outbreak. 12 children, all under the age of 10, died within a 6-hour period on the night of June 14, 1962. But the witness statements told a different story. Nurse Catherine Breyer, 25 years old at the time, testified that she'd heard screaming from the pediatric ward at 2 a.m. When she investigated, she found Dr. Holbrook and 2 surgical assistants performing some kind of procedure on multiple children simultaneously. The children were conscious but paralyzed. Holbrook claimed he was preventing death and studying the threshold. By dawn, all 12 children were dead. Dr. Holbrook disappeared the same night. His body was never found. The 2 surgical assistants were found dead in their homes 3 days later. Apparent murder-suicide. Nurse Breyer suffered a mental breakdown and was institutionalized for 6 months. The hospital managed to continue operating for another 25 years, though under constant scrutiny. Then in October 1987, structural inspectors discovered something during a routine evaluation. A hidden sub-basement level not shown on the original building plans. The inspection report was clinical and careful, but reading between the lines was horrifying. They found sealed surgical rooms, patient remains, equipment for procedures that didn't match any known medical practice, records documenting experiments on patients who, according to official logs, had died years earlier. St. Mercy was closed immediately. Criminal investigations began but went nowhere. Most of the responsible parties were long dead. The hospital sat empty, occasionally proposed for renovation or demolition, but somehow always slipping through bureaucratic cracks, remaining in limbo. I found another microfiche that made my hands shake. Employment records for the property management company that currently employed me. They'd contracted maintenance workers for St. Mercy since 2003, when the building was first considered for historical preservation. Marcus Webb, the maintenance worker before me, had worked there for 6 months in 2011. The company kept employee logs, and Marcus had been required to document his shifts. I requested his file. The early entries were routine. Cleaned administrative wing, checked breakers, no issues. But they grew progressively more disturbed. March 15, 2011, heard footsteps on 4th floor, investigated despite rules, found nothing but doors were unlocked that I know I'd locked the night before. April 2, 2011, saw a figure in old surgical gown in 3rd floor window. When I went to investigate, no one there. Starting to understand why the rules exist. April 23rd, 2011, the rules aren't enough. Something in this building is aware of us. It's watching, testing, waiting for mistakes. May 14th, 2011, found my own name written on patient charts from 1962. Charts for procedures I've never undergone. This isn't coincidence. The building is claiming us retroactively. His final entry was dated May 29th, 2011. The elevator took me to the 5th floor tonight. There is no 5th floor, but I was there. I saw what they're still doing. Dr. Holbrook was there. Not a ghost, something else. Something that's been sustained by this place, by the procedures, by the suffering. He saw me. He smiled. He said, "You're early for your appointment, but we can take you now." I ran, but I don't think I fully escaped. I can still feel the operating theater. I think part of me is still there on the table, undergoing the procedure. I think I'm going to... The entry ended mid-sentence. According to the records, Marcus Webb was found dead in his apartment on June 1st, 2011. Apparent suicide by drug overdose. But the police report noted that Webb had no history of drug use, no drugs in his possession, and no clear source for the fatal dose of morphine in his system. The autopsy report had a detail that made my stomach turn. Surgical marks on Webb's body that weren't from the autopsy. Old scars, recently healed in patterns consistent with exploratory surgery. But Webb had no medical procedures in his health records, no explanation for the scars. I closed the files and sat in the archives room as afternoon turned to evening, trying to process what I'd learned. Dr. Holbrook had believed he could cure death. He'd experimented on patients, particularly children, trying to keep them in liminal states between life and death so he could study the transition and potentially reverse it. The night the 12 children died, he'd succeeded, in the worst possible way. He'd trapped them in an eternal moment of suffering, and somehow he'd trapped himself too. St. Mercy Hospital wasn't haunted, it was still operating, existing in a sustained moment of trauma, repeating its worst procedures forever. The building remembered every scream, every failed experiment, every moment of agony. And the rules weren't protection from ghosts. They were protocols to avoid becoming patients in a hospital that never closed, never stopped taking new subjects for procedures that never ended. As I left the courthouse, my phone rang. Mr. Voss, my supervisor, his voice tight with stress. "David, we haven't seen you in 3 days. Are you coming back?" I should have said no. I should have quit, moved states, tried to forget St. Mercy existed. Instead, I said, "I'll be there tonight." Because I needed to understand. Because Carmen was still in the psychiatric ward, catatonic, undergoing some invisible procedure that might never end. Because Marcus Webb had died with surgical scars he'd never received. Because somewhere in that building was an answer, a way to end this, or at least understand it. And because deep down, I knew I was already claimed. The hospital had noticed me the night I heard the children laughing. It was only a matter of time before it collected. She was waiting in the lobby when I arrived for my shift that night. An elderly woman, maybe 85 or 90, dressed in a coat too thin for February's cold. She stood at the old reception desk, one hand resting on its dusty surface, staring at the wall where decades-old notices and announcements still hung behind cracked glass. I should have been startled. No one should have been able to enter the building. But somehow her presence felt expected, inevitable. "You're David," she said without turning around. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a voice that had once been authoritative but now carried the tremor of age. "I am. You shouldn't be here. The building's not safe." She turned then, and I saw her face fully. Deeply lined, her eyes carrying the weight of witnessing things that shouldn't be witnessed, but sharp, present, aware. "I'm Catherine Breyer," she said. "Nurse Breyer. I worked here from 1958 to 1962. I survived the night those children died, though sometimes I wonder if survived is the right word. I recognized the name from the newspaper archives. The nurse who'd tried to stop Dr. Holbrook, who'd testified about what she'd seen, who'd spent 6 months institutionalized after the incident. "How did you get in?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I never really left, David. None of us do once we've worked here. I come back every few months, usually around anniversaries. June 14th, the night the children died. October 15th, the day they finally closed the hospital. I leave flowers at the pediatric ward entrance, the least I can do after failing to protect them." She moved toward me slowly, her gait careful but steady. "I've watched the maintenance workers come and go. Some last a few weeks before the fear drives them away. Some follow the rules and survive their contracts, and some—" She trailed off, her expression darkening. "Some don't leave at all. Not really." "Marcus Webb," I said. Yes, Marcus was curious, determined to understand. He broke too many rules, pushed too hard, and the hospital claimed him. By the end, he was working 2 jobs, one for the living world during his shifts and one for Dr. Holbrook during what he thought was his time off. He just didn't know it yet. My skin crawled. "What does that mean?" Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where my car sat alone. "Dr. Emmett Holbrook believed he could cure death, not in the philosophical sense, literally cure it, eliminate it, reverse it. He thought that if he could keep patients suspended in the liminal space between life and death, he could study the exact mechanism of transition and potentially stop it, even reverse it." She touched the window glass, her breath fogging it. "He started with terminal patients, then psychiatric patients who wouldn't be missed, then the children. Always the children because their systems were young, adaptable, could sustain the procedures longer." "What procedures?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "Keeping them on the threshold, clinically dead but artificially sustained, conscious but paralyzed, aware but unable to communicate. He'd induce death, study the transition, then revive them over and over, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, all while they were aware, experiencing every moment." Catherine's reflection in the window looked ancient, haunted. "The night of June 14th, 1962, something happened. I don't understand the science, if there was any science to it. But during the procedures on those 12 children, Holbrook didn't just suspend them between life and death. He trapped them there permanently, created a space where they existed in perpetual transition, unable to live or die, frozen in the moment of their suffering." "How is that possible?" I whispered. "Because belief has power, David. Obsession has power, and Holbrook had been performing these procedures for years, saturating this building with suffering, with liminal states, with the energy of lives suspended between existence and non-existence. The building absorbed it all, became it. St. Mercy Hospital stopped being a place and became a condition, a sustained moment of trauma." She turned from the window, and Holbrook trapped himself in it too. When those children died but didn't die, he realized what he'd created. I saw his face that night, not triumph, horror. He understood he'd succeeded in the worst possible way. Rather than curing death, he'd created an eternal dying, and the building, saturated with all those years of suffering, wouldn't let him leave. "He's still here," I said. Not a question. "He's still operating, still conducting procedures, still trying to cure death by trapping souls in the threshold. The building sustains him, gives him form and purpose, and he needs new patients, always new patients to continue his research." I thought of Carmen, catatonic in the psychiatric ward, still undergoing some invisible procedure. Of Marcus Webb, dying with surgical scars he'd never received. of the rules, each one designed to prevent the hospital from claiming new victims. The rules, I said. Who wrote them? Everyone who's worked here and survived. Each person adds what they've learned, what they've witnessed, what almost claimed them. The rules have grown over decades. They're not comprehensive. There are always new ways the building tries to claim people, but they're the best protection we have. Catherine reached into her coat and pulled out a small bundle. 3 white carnations, their petals already wilting. I should go to the pediatric ward before it gets too late. The children appreciate the flowers, I think. Or the building appreciates the gesture. I'm not always sure which. Wait, I said. How do I stop this? How do I end it? She looked at me with something like pity. You don't, David. The building is sustained by decades of trauma, hundreds of procedures, countless souls trapped in liminal states. It's not a haunting you can exorcise or a ghost you can lay to rest. It's a condition, a sustained state of being. The only choice you have is whether to follow the rules and survive or break them and become another patient. There has to be a way. Marcus thought so too. He researched, investigated, tried to find Dr. Holbrook's original notes, thought if he could understand the mechanism of what happened, he could reverse it. He found Holbrook, David, on the 5th floor that doesn't exist. And Holbrook found him. She moved toward the stairs. The rules aren't to protect you from ghosts. They're to prevent you from becoming one of his patients. Because the hospital is still operating. It never closed. We're just walking through the memory of what it was. She started climbing the stairs, her movement slow but determined. Why do you come back? I called after her. If it's this dangerous, why risk it? She paused, not turning around. Because those children deserved better. Because I failed them once and I won't fail them again by forgetting, and because... Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because part of me never left. Part of me is still on that floor, still watching the procedures, still frozen in the moment I realized I couldn't save them. Coming back is the only way to remember I'm still alive. Then she was gone, ascending into the darkness toward the pediatric ward, carrying flowers for children who'd been dead for 62 years but had never been allowed to rest. I stood alone in the lobby, my shift just beginning, understanding finally what I was dealing with. St. Mercy Hospital wasn't haunted. It was still in operation, existing in a sustained moment of medical horror, repeating its worst procedures on anyone who strayed from the rules' protection. And Dr. Holbrook was still the attending physician, always seeking new patients for experiments that would never end. I checked my watch. 10:47 p.m. 8 hours until dawn. 8 hours of following the rules precisely, of staying in authorized areas, of avoiding the building's attempts to claim me as a patient. I opened the binder of rules, reading them again with new understanding. Each one was a lesson learned through someone's near-death experience. Each one marked a boundary between the living world and the sustained moment of trauma that St. Mercy had become. I would follow them exactly. I would survive my shift. And tomorrow I would return because the hospital had already noticed me. The only question was how long I could avoid becoming a permanent patient. The snowstorm hit on a Tuesday night in late February, one of those Appalachian winter storms that transforms the landscape into a white isolation. By 11 p.m., the access road to St. Mercy was impassable. My Civic, the only vehicle in the parking lot, snow already drifting against its tires. The power failed at 11:47 p.m. Not a gradual brownout. The lights simply died. Every circuit in the administrative wing cutting out simultaneously. My flashlight became the only illumination in the vast darkness of the building, its beam creating more shadows than it dispelled. I made my way to the breaker box in the basement maintenance room, following the route I'd memorized over weeks of shifts. The breakers were all tripped, which made no sense. They should have failed individually if there was an overload, not all at once. I reset them. Nothing happened. The power was simply gone, cut off from the building entirely. I checked the backup generator, but it wouldn't start. Fuel line was clear, battery was charged, but the engine just clicked uselessly, as if some crucial component had been deliberately sabotaged. I radioed Mr. Voss on the emergency channel. Static was the only response. The storm must have taken out the cell tower, and the hospital's old landlines had been disconnected years ago. I was alone in a 6-story abandoned hospital during a snowstorm with no power, no communication, no way to leave until the roads cleared. And that's when I heard the crying. A child's crying coming from the floor above, from the sealed sections, from the direction of the pediatric ward. Rule number 2, if you hear children laughing, leave your floor immediately. But this wasn't laughter. This was genuine, heartbreaking sobbing. A little girl's voice crying for her mother, scared and alone in the darkness. I stood at the basement stairs listening. The sound was continuous, desperate, not the playful laughter I'd heard on my 8th shift. This was different. This was a child in distress. Every rational part of my mind screamed that it was a trap. The building mimicking sounds to lure me into violation. The rules existed for a reason. Carmen had investigated sounds and ended up catatonic. Marcus had broken the rules and died with unexplained surgical scars. But it was a child crying, a child who sounded terrified and alone. I climbed the stairs with my flashlight, each step a conscious choice to potentially walk into catastrophe. The crying grew louder as I ascended. Ground floor, first floor, second floor. By the 3rd floor, I could hear it clearly, coming from the sealed section, from the pediatric ward I'd been explicitly forbidden to enter after 11 p.m. It was 2:17 a.m., well past the prohibited time. I stood at the entrance to the pediatric ward, my hand on the door that separated the administrative wing from the sealed sections. The door that should have been locked but swung open easily under my touch, as if the building itself was inviting me in. "Please," the child's voice called from deeper in the ward. "Please, I'm scared. I want my mommy." I thought about Carmen lying catatonic in a psychiatric ward, still undergoing invisible procedures. I thought about Marcus Webb, dead with surgical scars from operations he'd never received. I thought about the 12 children who died on June 14, 1962, trapped forever in a moment of suffering. I thought about all the rules I'd followed so carefully, all the protocols designed to keep me safe by keeping me separate from the building's horror. And I stepped through the door. The pediatric ward was transformed. Not the decay and abandonment I'd glimpsed before, but pristine, operating alive with antiseptic light despite the power outage. The floor was polished linoleum, 1960s-era child-friendly murals decorating the walls, cartoon animals and smiling children. Hospital beds lined both sides of the corridor, each occupied by a sleeping child, their breathing synchronized in an unnatural rhythm. Vintage medical equipment hummed, monitors showing steady heartbeats, IV drips feeding clear fluid into small arms. But the children never moved. Just lay sleeping, eternally sleeping in beds that had been empty for 62 years. I walked down the corridor, passing bed after bed, my flashlight beam unnecessary in the impossible light that had no source. The crying was coming from the end of the hall, from a room whose door stood ajar, revealing flickering light within. I reached the room. Inside, a little girl stood alone, maybe 7 years old, wearing a faded hospital gown. She had her back to me, facing a wall covered in children's drawings, colorful crayon pictures of families, houses, pets, dreams that would never come true. "Hello?" I said softly. She turned. Her face was normal, human, a pretty child with brown hair and large eyes. But those eyes, they were hollow, empty, looking at me but through me, seeing something I couldn't perceive. "Are you here to help the doctor?" she asked. Her voice was the one I'd heard crying, but now it carried no emotion, just a flat affect. "He said someone would come. He said we needed more friends for the procedures." Behind her, the wall wasn't a wall. It was a window, a surgical observation window looking into an operating theater. And in that theater, surgical lights blazed, casting sharp shadows. A figure stood at the operating table, tall and thin, wearing a vintage surgical gown and mask. As I watched, the figure turned toward the window, toward me, and I saw eyes behind the mask, intelligent eyes, hungry eyes. Dr. Holbrook, not a ghost, not a memory, something sustained by the building, given form and purpose by decades of trapped suffering. He raised one hand in greeting, almost casual, then gestured toward the operating table. The table was empty, waiting, prepared with straps and equipment for the next patient. For me. "We've been expecting you," the little girl said. "Dr. Holbrook says you've been very good at following the rules, but you heard me crying and you came anyway. That means you're ready for treatment. That means you care more about helping than about staying safe." The temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My breath steamed. Behind me, I heard doors closing throughout the pediatric ward, soft clicks echoing in sequence one after another, sealing me in. "You don't have to be scared," the girl continued. "The procedures help us. They keep us from being alone. They make us part of something that never ends. Dr. Holbrook is very gentle. He only hurts us because he cares." I backed toward the door, but it was already closing. I caught it with my hand, felt something on the other side pushing back, stronger than me. Inevitable as gravity. "I need to leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Nobody leaves," the girl said. Her hollow eyes filled with something, not tears, but a dark liquid that ran down her cheeks like ink. "We all tried to leave, but the doctor needs us. The hospital needs us. We're part of the procedures now, forever and ever, until he finds a cure for death." The door was closing despite my resistance. Through the observation window, Dr. Holbrook was preparing his instruments, laying them out on a surgical tray with practiced precision. Scalpels, clamps, devices I couldn't identify, instruments that looked medieval, designed for procedures that shouldn't exist. I remembered what Nurse Breyer had said. The building is sustained by decades of trauma. The only choice you have is whether to follow the rules and survive or break them and become another patient. I'd broken the rules. I'd entered the pediatric ward after 11 p.m. I'd investigated the crying. I'd walked into the trap with my eyes open, choosing compassion over survival. And now the hospital was claiming me. The corridor behind me had changed. It was stretching, elongating, the entrance impossibly distant. The sleeping children in their beds were sitting up now, turning to watch me with hollow eyes like the little girls. Their synchronized breathing had stopped. They were waiting to see what would happen to the newest patient. I did the only thing I could think of. I started breaking windows. My flashlight was heavy, metal-bodied. I swung it at the nearest window and the glass shattered outward, letting in a blast of freezing wind and snow. The antiseptic light flickered. The humming medical equipment stuttered. I smashed another window. Another. The storm poured in, temperature plummeting, snow swirling through the pediatric ward. The children in the beds began crying, all of them simultaneously, a chorus of distress. But now I understood what the sound meant. They weren't asking for help. They were warning me to stop, to accept the procedures, to become part of the sustained moment. I refused. I broke every window I could reach, letting the winter storm flood the ward, disrupting the perfect preservation of 1962, forcing the present moment into the hospital's sustained past. The corridor collapsed around me, not physically but temporally. The pristine 1960s ward flickered, revealing glimpses of decay underneath. The sleeping children vanished and reappeared as shadows, as memories, as trauma sustained by the building's architecture. Dr. Holbrook appeared in the corridor, no longer behind the observation window. Tall, impossibly tall, his surgical gown stained with decades of old blood. His face behind the mask was wrong. Too many angles, too many shadows, as if he was only partially present in this reality. "You're damaging the sterile environment," he said. His voice was calm, professional, disappointed. "The procedures require specific conditions. You're jeopardizing the patients." "They're not patients," I gasped, still swinging my flashlight at windows. "They're prisoners. You trap them. You're not curing death, you're preventing life." "You don't understand the research," Holbrook said, moving closer. "The liminal state preserves consciousness indefinitely. These children have experienced more, learned more, existed more in their suspended state than they ever would have in normal lives. I've given them immortality. I've given them purpose. You've given them suffering," I said. He reached for me, his surgical gloved hands extending with that same impossible wrongness, fingers too long, joints bending in extra places. I swung the flashlight at him. It passed through him like smoke, but the motion disrupted something. He flickered, transparency increasing as if the storm and broken windows were weakening whatever sustained his presence. I ran. Not toward the exit, that was sealed, impossible, but toward the stairs leading up, toward the higher floors, toward areas I hadn't explored. Maybe there was another way out. Maybe if I could get high enough, far enough from the epicenter of the sustained moment, I could break free. Behind me, Dr. Holbrook's voice echoed through the building. "You can't leave, David. You broke the rules. You entered the pediatric ward. You've been marked as a patient. The hospital has claimed you. The only question is whether we operate now or later." I climbed stairs that shouldn't exist, passing the 4th floor, reaching a 5th floor that the rules insisted wasn't there. But it was real now, solid beneath my feet, Dr. Holbrook's eternal operating theater where the procedures never ended. The storm followed me, wind howling through the building, snow drifting through broken windows. The temperature was lethal now, well below zero, and I realized the cold might be my salvation. The building sustained itself through preservation, through maintaining the moment of 1962 in perfect stasis. The storm was disruption, chaos, the unstoppable present moment crashing into the frozen past. I found the largest window on the 5th floor, the observation window overlooking the main operating theater. I could see the entire space, the amphitheater seating filled with spectral figures, the central table prepared for the next patient, the equipment that had been running for 62 years without pause. I picked up a gurney and drove it through the window. The glass exploded outward. The storm rushed in with apocalyptic fury, wind and snow flooding the operating theater, ice forming on surfaces, frost consuming the equipment. The lights went out. Not the electric lights, those had failed hours ago, but the impossible antiseptic light that had illuminated the building's sustained moment. That light died, and with it the preservation that had kept the hospital operating since 1962. I heard screaming, Dr. Holbrook screaming, not in rage but in anguish, as his eternal moment finally ended. The building groaned, shuddered, and I felt reality reasserting itself, the present moment finally overwhelming the trapped past. I don't remember how I got back to the ground floor. I don't remember leaving the building. My next clear memory is waking in my car at dawn, hypothermic, frostbitten but alive. The 4th floor windows were shattered exactly as I'd left them. My flashlight was missing. My hands were bleeding from broken glass. And on my wrist was something that shouldn't be there. A hospital bracelet, old and yellowed, typed text, still legible. Reese David, patient, bar 4477. Admit date, 02/18/1962. 63 years before I was born. I should have driven away, should have started my car, navigated the snow-blocked roads, and never looked back. But I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was seeing on my wrist, a hospital bracelet dated decades before my birth, my name typed on medical paperwork from an impossible past. The bracelet felt old against my skin, the plastic yellowed and brittle. When I tried to remove it, pain shot through my arm, not from the bracelet itself, but from underneath, as if removing it would tear away something essential. I looked up at St. Mercy Hospital. The building appeared different in the dawn light. Damaged, yes. The shattered fourth-floor windows gaped like wounds. But also somehow more present, more solid than it had been before. As if by breaking the sustained moment, I'd anchored it more firmly to reality. That's when I noticed the entrance door was open, not just unlocked, wide open despite the storm, despite the cold. An invitation. Or a summons. I got out of the car. Every rational instinct screamed to flee, but something deeper, something connected to the bracelet on my wrist, to the hospital's claim on me, pulled me toward the building. I was a patient now. Patients don't refuse the doctor's instructions. The lobby was dark, but no longer impossibly preserved. It looked like what it was, an abandoned hospital, cold and decayed and empty. The 1987 calendar still hung behind the reception desk. Dust covered every surface. But I could feel the presence beneath the decay. The sustained moment I'd disrupted wasn't gone, just wounded, bleeding, retreating to protect its core. I walked toward the stairs, not because I chose to, but because my body was moving without full conscious control, guided by the bracelet's weight, by the hospital's claim, by Dr. Oz Holbrook's patient roster that had somehow retroactively included me. David, the voice came from the second-floor landing. Nurse Catherine Breyer stood there, no longer elderly but young, 25 years old, wearing a 1962 nurse's uniform, looking exactly as she must have looked the night the children died. "You shouldn't have broken the windows," she said. Not angry, just sad. "You destabilized the preservation. Now the building is trying to repair itself by pulling you deeper into the moment. You're not just a patient anymore. You're being integrated into 1962, becoming part of the sustained trauma." "I had to," I said. The girl was crying. A child needed help. There was no child, David, just the building, using sounds to lure you past the rules' protection. And it worked because you're good, because you care. Because when you heard suffering, you couldn't walk away. She descended the stairs slowly. That's how it claimed most of them. The people who survived working here. They were the ones who could follow rules even when it seemed cruel. The ones who could hear children crying and stay away. The ones who valued survival over compassion. She reached the lobby and I could see her more clearly. She was translucent, not fully present, flickering between young and old, between 1962 and now. "I'm not real, David. Not the way you think. The real Catherine Breyer is at home, elderly, asleep. But part of her never left this building. Part of her is still here, still watching the procedures, still trying to save those children. That's what happens when you work here long enough. You split. Part of you stays in the moment of trauma, and part of you continues in the present, but neither part is whole." "How do I stop it?" I asked. "How do I get free?" "You can't. Not anymore. The bracelet means you're in the system now, registered as a patient. Dr. Holbrook has your file, your admission paperwork, your treatment plan. You're scheduled for procedures. The only question is whether you accept them or fight them." The elevator doors opened behind her. The old Art Deco elevator that supposedly only went to the 4th floor. Inside, the buttons glowed with impossible light. 5 floors. The 5th floor that didn't exist, but absolutely did. "He's waiting for you up there," Catherine said. "On the 5th floor." The eternal operating theater where the procedures never end. If you go up, you'll become part of the sustained moment permanently. You'll be another patient undergoing Dr. Holbrook's experimental treatments forever, aware but unable to die, trapped in the liminal space he created. What's the alternative? She smiled sadly. There isn't one. You broke the rules, David. You entered the pediatric ward. You heard the claim and you came when called. The hospital owns you now. I looked at the elevator, at its impossible fifth-floor button glowing like a promise or a threat. Then I looked at Catherine's translucent form, at the way she flickered between ages, between moments. You said people split, I said slowly. Part stays in the trauma, part continues in the present. What if I choose which part is which? What if I go up there, let the building claim the part of me it wants, but keep my consciousness here in reality, in the present? Catherine's expression changed. Surprise, then something like hope. That's what Marcus tried. He thought he could partition himself, give the hospital what it needed while keeping his awareness free. But he couldn't control it. The hospital took more than he offered. By the end, he didn't know which part was real. But it's possible, I insisted. Maybe, if you're strong enough. If you can maintain your sense of self even as you're being integrated into the sustained moment. She looked toward the elevator. But David, even if you succeed, even if you keep your consciousness here, a part of you will be up there forever, undergoing procedures, experiencing what those children experience. You'll feel it, know it's happening, even if you're not fully present. It will be torture spanning decades. I thought about Carmen, catatonic but aware, still feeling the operations, about Marcus dying while wearing surgical scars from procedures performed in the 1960s, about the 12 children trapped in eternal suffering because Dr. Holbrook believed he could cure death. What happens if I don't go up? I asked. The hospital will take you anyway, eventually. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. You're a patient now. Patients can't refuse treatment. The bracelet is your admission paperwork. You're in the system. Better to go now on your own terms with some chance of maintaining control than to have it forced on you later when you're too tired to resist. The elevator hummed, waiting. The fifth-floor button pulsed with light. I stepped inside. The elevator doors closed. The button for the fifth floor was warm under my finger, almost alive. I pressed it. The elevator rose smoothly, passing the second floor, the third floor, the fourth floor. Then it continued upward into a space that shouldn't exist, climbing beyond the building's physical structure into somewhere else, into the sustained moment, into Dr. Holbrook's eternal operating theater. The doors opened. The fifth floor was vast, impossible, a surgical amphitheater that shouldn't fit within the building's footprint but stretched into infinity. Rows of seating rose into darkness filled with spectral observers. Patients in hospital gowns, nurses in vintage uniforms, doctors in surgical masks, all watching the central operating area with blank eternal attention. Dr. Holbrook stood at the main surgical table exactly as I'd seen him before. Tall, thin. His features behind the surgical mask wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. His eyes tracked me as I stepped out of the elevator. "Patient 4477, he said. His voice was calm, professional, gentle. "You're early, but we're ready for you. Please lie down on the table." The table was prepared. Straps, instruments, monitoring equipment. Behind it, massive windows showed impossible views. Not the Ohio landscape, but something else. Somewhere else. The liminal space between life and death made physical. "I understand your research," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You believed you could cure death by studying the transition, keeping patients suspended in the threshold." "Not believed," Holbrook corrected. "Achieved. These patients," he gestured to the spectral observers, have existed in sustained consciousness for decades. They've experienced more, learned more than any humans in history. Death is no longer their master. They are eternal. They're suffering, I said, eternally. Suffering is temporary discomfort in service of greater understanding. Once the research is complete, once I've mapped every aspect of the liminal state, I'll be able to cure death for everyone. These patients are pioneers, heroes. They sacrifice their temporary comfort for humanity's immortal future. He approached me, surgical gloves leaving frost in the air. You'll join them, David. You've been admitted to my care. Together we'll explore the threshold. You'll help me understand what keeps consciousness bound to dying flesh. Through procedures, through careful study, through the eternal examination of your liminal state, we'll unlock the final secrets of mortality. I looked at the observers, the trapped souls, the eternal patients. Some had been here since the hospital's founding. Decades of procedures, decades of consciousness trapped in dying moments. Awareness forced to endure the impossible. And I saw the children. The 12 from June 14, 1962, sitting in the front row, hollow-eyed but present, still undergoing Holbrook's treatments, still hoping for rescue that would never come. I have a condition, I said. Holbrook paused. Patients don't negotiate treatment plans. This one does. I'll submit to your procedures. I'll let you study my liminal state, map my threshold, do whatever experiments you need. But I choose which part of me you get. His eyes behind the mask narrowed. Explain. You need my consciousness for the research. You need aware patients, people who can experience the procedures and provide the data you need. But consciousness isn't all or nothing. People split, part here, part there, part in one moment, part in another. I'll give you the part you need for the research, but the other part, the part that remains David Reese, that exists in the present, that remembers who I am, that part stays free. Impossible, Holbrook said, but he sounded uncertain. Nurse Breyer did it. She split between 1962 and now. Part of her is still here, watching your procedures, trying to save those children. But part of her continues, lives a life, exists outside this sustained moment. I'll do the same. You get your patient, your research subject, your data. But I keep myself. Holbrook was silent for a long moment, his impossible hands adjusting surgical instruments. Finally, if you can maintain the partition. Most can't. They fragment, lose coherence, forget which part is real. You'll feel the procedures, David. Even the part of you that stays free will know what's being done to the part that's here. It will be constant, eternal awareness of your own examination. I know. And you accept this? I looked at the children again, at the observers who'd been trapped here for decades, at the building itself, sustained by suffering, powered by the procedures. I accept, but I have a second condition. Patients don't... You need me, I interrupted. The building is damaged. I broke the windows, disrupted the preservation. You're losing cohesion. The sustained moment is bleeding into the present. You need new patients to stabilize it, to reinforce the trauma that keeps you operational. That gives me leverage. Holbrook's posture changed, becoming more alert, more present. What's your second condition? When I'm ready, when I've learned enough, when I understand how the procedures work and what sustains you, you let me end it. Let me free the others. Let me collapse the sustained moment and finally allow everyone, including you, to finish dying. The amphitheater fell absolutely silent. Every spectral observer turned toward me, hollow eyes suddenly focused, suddenly aware. You want to destroy my research, Holbrook said quietly. Erase decades of data. Prevent the cure for death. I want to free people from torture disguised as immortality. You've learned everything you're going to learn, Dr. Holbrook. 62 years of procedures and you're no closer to curing death. You've just created an eternal dying. It's time to let it end. No. The word echoed through the amphitheater with terrible finality. Holbrook moved toward me, no longer doctor, but something else. The sustained trauma itself, given purpose and form, unable to accept its own meaninglessness. The research continues, he said. It must continue. Every patient brings new data. Every procedure brings us closer to understanding. I will cure death, David. I will prove that mortality can be defeated. These patients' suffering has meaning. It must have meaning. He reached for me, ready to strap me to the table, to begin the procedures, to add me to the eternal patients. I did something that surprised both of us. I laughed. You're afraid, I said. That's what all this is. You're terrified of death, so you've trapped yourself and everyone else in the moment before dying, convinced yourself it's research, told yourself you're helping. But you're just running from the inevitable, Doctor. You're just too afraid to let go. Holbrook froze. Behind his mask, I saw his eyes. Actually saw them, clear and human for the first time. And in them was terror, bottomless and ancient. The procedures, he whispered. The research. It has to mean something. Their suffering has to mean something. It doesn't, I said gently. You tortured people because you were afraid. You trapped souls because you couldn't accept endings. You sustained this nightmare because admitting it was meaningless would be worse than continuing it. But it's time to stop, Dr. Holbrook. It's time to let everyone, including yourself, go. The amphitheater began to shake. The spectral observers were standing, moving, their eternal stasis disrupted. The children were crying, not in pain but in hope, sudden and desperate. I don't know how to stop, Holbrook said. His voice was small, human, the voice of a man who'd made a terrible mistake 62 years ago and had been unable to face it since. Then I'll help you, I said. That's the real procedure, Doctor, not studying death, accepting it, not sustaining consciousness, letting it rest. Let me show you how. I lay down on the operating table, not because I was forced to, but because I chose to. And in that choice, everything changed. I woke in my car in the parking lot at dawn. The memory of what happened in the operating theater was fragmented, dreamlike. I remembered lying on the table, remembered Dr. Holbrook's hands, cold, trembling, placing surgical instruments not on me but beside me, setting them down like a burden he could finally release. I remembered the spectral observers standing, moving toward the center of the amphitheater. Remembered the children holding hands, 12 small figures linked together, their hollow eyes filling with something like peace. I remembered Holbrook removing his surgical mask, showing a face ravaged by decades of sustained existence, aging and de-aging simultaneously. A man trapped in his worst moment, finally allowing himself to feel its full weight. And I remembered the building shuddering, the lights failing, the sustained moment collapsing as the souls it had trapped were finally released. Remembered feeling them pass through me like a wind, like exhaled breath, like the moment between waking and sleep. Then nothing until I woke here, hypothermic, frostbitten, but alive. The hospital looked different in the morning light, more decayed, more genuinely abandoned. The fourth-floor windows were still shattered, my doing, my disruption. But the building felt emptier now, just a structure no longer sustained by trauma. I checked my phone, February 19th, 6:47 a.m. My shift had officially ended 47 minutes ago. I lifted my wrist to check the time and felt plastic against my skin. The hospital bracelet was still there. Reese David, patient number 4477, admit date, 02/18/1962. Not a dream then, not a hallucination brought on by hypothermia. I'd gone to the 5th floor. I'd lain on Dr. Holbrook's operating table. I'd made a deal, myself, in exchange for releasing the others. But I was here, in my car, in the present. Free, mostly. I tried to remove the bracelet. The plastic was brittle. Should have snapped easily, but when I pulled at it, pain shot through my arm. Deeper than muscle, deeper than bone. Pain in somewhere I couldn't locate physically, as if the bracelet was connected to a part of me that existed outside normal space. I stopped pulling. The pain faded. I understood then what had happened. I'd split, just as Nurse Breyer had split, just as I'd proposed to Dr. Holbrook. Part of me was here in the present, free to continue living. But part of me remained on that operating table, undergoing the procedures, providing the data Holbrook needed. I could feel it if I concentrated, a distant sensation of examination, of instruments moving in flesh that was and wasn't mine. Not quite pain, more like the memory of pain, happening to a version of myself that existed in parallel. The partition was holding. I was David Reese, 34 years old, in February 2025. But I was also patient 4477, admitted February 18, 1962, undergoing eternal procedures in the liminal space Dr. Holbrook had created. I was here and there simultaneously, split across time and existence. My phone rang, making me jump. Mr. Voss calling from a different number. David, Jesus, we've been trying to reach you all night. The storm knocked out the cell towers. Are you okay? Is the building okay? I looked at St. Mercy Hospital through my windshield. It stood silent, damaged but standing, windows dark. I'm fine, I said. The building lost power. I couldn't restore it. Some windows broke in the storm. 4th floor, eastern wing. Christ, okay. Listen, I'm sending emergency maintenance to secure the broken windows. We're fast-tracking the demolition paperwork. The historical designation has been revoked. Apparently, there was some issue with the preservation committee. They're suddenly eager to tear it down. Your contract is complete, David. We're issuing your final paycheck plus a severance bonus. You don't need to return to the site. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. Why the rush to demolish? I asked. Voss was quiet for a moment. We've had incidents. 3 maintenance workers over the years, including you. The company's legal team is worried about liability. Easier to tear it down than explain why we kept assigning people to work there. The demolition is scheduled for April. They'll preserve the foundation for a historical marker, but the rest comes down. After he hung up, I sat in my car, engine running for warmth, trying to process what had happened. The spectral observers were gone. I'd felt them release, pass through, move on to whatever comes after the liminal state. The children, too, finally allowed to finish dying, to rest after 62 years of sustained torture. And Dr. Holbrook? I wasn't sure. When I'd last seen him, he was standing in the center of the operating theater, surrounded by empty seats. The eternal procedures finally ended. Was he gone too? Or was he trapped there alone in a sustained moment that no longer had purpose, no longer had patience, no longer had meaning? I drove home carefully, the roads snow-covered but passable. My apartment felt unfamiliar after weeks of night shifts, as if I'd been gone much longer than one night. I showered, trying to wash away the hospital smell, the antiseptic and decay. But it clung to me, deeper than skin. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself clearly, bruised, exhausted, frost-nipped, but alive. Except for my eyes. Something in my eyes was different. A hollowness I recognized from the spectral observers, from the eternal patience. Part of me was still there, still undergoing the procedures, and that part was visible if you knew what to look for. I slept poorly, waking every few hours to the sensation of examination, of instruments moving in flesh that existed in another time. Not quite pain, but awareness. Constant, inescapable awareness of being studied, measured, analyzed in a hospital that existed in 1962 and now simultaneously. The next few days passed in a haze. I tried to return to normalcy, job applications, grocery shopping, basic life maintenance. But the partition required constant attention. I had to focus on being present, on being here, or I'd slip into the other state, the other moment, the eternal operating theater. At night it was worse. I'd dream of the fifth floor, of lying on Holbrook's table, of spectral observers watching procedures that never ended. I'd wake gasping, unsure which version of myself was real. Then came the medical appointment I didn't schedule. I received a reminder text on February 24th, medical follow-up scheduled for 2:25 at 10:00 a.m. St. Mercy Regional Clinic, please arrive 15 minutes early. I'd never made this appointment. St. Mercy Regional was the modern hospital in town, no connection to the abandoned building. But when I checked my email, I found a confirmation from 3 weeks ago, an appointment I had no memory of making. The email signature was from Dr. E. Holbrook. I went to the appointment, compelled by the same force that had pulled me into the pediatric ward, that had driven me to the fifth floor. The bracelet on my wrist felt warm, almost alive. St. Mercy Regional was bright, modern, clean. Nothing like the abandoned hospital. But when I gave my name at reception, the receptionist's expression changed. She checked her computer twice, frowned, then directed me to an examination room in a section of the hospital I couldn't quite map relative to the entrance. I waited 20 minutes. Then a doctor entered, young, professional, wearing modern scrubs and a warm smile. Her name tag read, Dr. Emily Holbrook, Internal Medicine. Not Dr. Emmett Holbrook, but Holbrook nonetheless. David Reese, she said, checking her tablet. You're here for a follow-up examination regarding… This is odd. The appointment notes are incomplete. Do you remember what we were following up on? I stared at her, at the name tag, at the way she held the tablet, examining it with intense focus as if looking for data that should be there but wasn't. Are you related to Dr. Emmett Holbrook? I asked. She looked surprised. That's my great-grandfather. He was a physician in the area back in the 60s. Disappeared in 1962. Family mystery we've never solved. How did you know about him? I worked at the old St. Mercy Hospital, I said carefully, the abandoned one. Read about him in the historical records. Ah, she smiled. That place is coming down in April, thank God. It's been a source of strange incidents for decades. My grandfather used to tell stories about it, said the building remembered things, whatever that means. Family legend says Dr. Emmett was conducting some kind of experimental research there before he vanished, but I'm sure it's just local folklore. She returned her attention to the tablet. Now about your appointment. The notes say follow-up examination, but there's no record of an initial appointment. Do you know what we're examining? I lifted my wrist, showing the hospital bracelet. Dr. Emily Holbrook's expression changed. The professional warmth drained away, replaced by something clinical, focused. She leaned forward, studying the bracelet with intensity that reminded me terribly of her great-grandfather. Where did you get that? She asked quietly. The old hospital. I can't remove it. It's connected to something. She reached out, not touching the bracelet, but holding her hand near it as if feeling for temperature or energy. The date, 1962, the year my great-grandfather disappeared. She met my eyes. Mr. Reese, I need to be honest with you. I've seen these bracelets before, 3 times over my 10 years of practice, always on people who worked at the old hospital. They come in with similar stories. Can't remove the bracelet, feel sensations they can't explain, experience time differently than they should. What happened to them? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. 2 died within 6 months. The autopsy reports showed surgical marks, old scars recently healed from procedures consistent with 1960s-era experimental surgery. But the patients had no record of any operations. The marks appeared spontaneously, as if— She paused. As if they were undergoing procedures that happened in the past but were manifesting in the present. And the third person? Still alive but institutionalized. She experiences time non-linearly now, says part of her exists in 1962 undergoing eternal examinations. The psychiatric evaluation classified it as schizophrenia, but— Dr. Holbrook looked at the bracelet again. I've always wondered if it was something else. Something my great-grandfather started that never really ended. She pulled back, professional composure returning. I can't remove the bracelet. I suspect trying would cause serious harm. But I can monitor you. Monthly checkups, blood work, imaging. If you start manifesting surgical marks or other anomalies, we'll document them. And Mr. Reese— Her expression was deadly serious. If you start losing time, if you can't distinguish between now and then, come in immediately. Once the partition breaks down completely, there's no bringing someone back. I left the clinic with monthly appointments scheduled, wondering if I was just delaying the inevitable. The hospital was being demolished in April. What would happen to the part of me that existed on the 5th floor when the physical building came down? Would it finally release me? Or would destroying the structure trap me permanently in the sustained moment, unable to return to the present? At home that night, I heard the children laughing, not from the abandoned hospital miles away, from inside my apartment. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The same laughter that had marked my first encounter with the building's horrors. I looked in the mirror and saw myself in a hospital gown just for a second. Saw the operating theater reflected behind me, even though I was standing in my bathroom. The partition was holding, but it was fragile. The building had claimed me. Even demolition might not break that claim. I researched everything I could about consciousness, split awareness, temporal displacement. I contacted the institutionalized woman Dr. Emily Holbrook had mentioned, a former janitor named Sarah Mitchells, who'd worked at St. Mercy in 2015. She agreed to see me at the psychiatric facility where she resided. When I arrived, she was sitting in a common area, staring at nothing, occasionally flinching as if reacting to stimuli no one else could perceive. "You have one," she said when she saw my wrist. She didn't ask, just stated it. A bracelet, a patient number, a date you weren't born yet to experience. February 18th, 1962, I confirmed. She nodded. Mine is March 4th, 1963. I've been a patient for 12 years now. By their calendar. The procedures don't stop, David. They never stop. And the more time passes in our reality, the harder it gets to maintain the partition. I'm losing track of which version is real. Sometimes I'm here, sometimes I'm there, and I can't tell the difference anymore. How do you cope? I don't. I document. She pulled out a notebook filled with detailed entries in shaking handwriting. Every procedure, every examination, everything Holbrook does to the part of me that's there. I write it down. Prove to myself that I'm still here, still aware in both states. It's the only way to maintain coherence. She handed me the notebook. Read it. Learn what's coming. Because demolition won't save you, David. The building is just the anchor point. The sustained moment exists outside normal space now. Tearing down the structure might make it worse, might sever the anchor and trap you permanently in 1962, unable to ever fully return. I read her notes late into the night. Detailed accounts of procedures I didn't understand, examinations that violated laws of biology and physics. Dr. Holbrook's relentless, gentle voice explaining his research as he worked on consciousness he'd trapped outside time. The final entry was from last week. I saw new patients arriving, young, confused, wearing bracelets they couldn't remove. The hospital is still admitting people even though it doesn't exist anymore. I tried to warn them, but I couldn't speak. I'm losing the ability to communicate across the partition. Soon I'll be there permanently, just another eternal patient in Holbrook's research. If you're reading this, you're already claimed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I closed the notebook as dawn broke. April was coming. Demolition was scheduled. And I had no idea what would happen to the part of me that existed on the 5th floor when the physical building came down. But I knew I had to try to free myself, free Sarah, free anyone else the hospital had claimed, even if it meant confronting Dr. Holbrook again. Even if it meant fully entering the sustained moment and risking never returning. The bracelet pulsed against my wrist, warm and alive, counting down to something I couldn't predict. I had until April to figure out how to end the eternal procedures, or become another permanent patient in a hospital that had never really closed. St. Mercy Hospital was demolished on April 12, 2025. I stood in the parking lot at dawn, watching the heavy machinery position itself around the building. Excavators, wrecking cranes, demolition crews in hard hats and safety vests. The morning was cold, but clear. Perfect conditions for controlled destruction. Mr. Voss was there too, overseeing the operation, carefully avoiding eye contact with me. I'd been explicitly told not to attend, that my contract was complete, that the company accepted no liability for any lingering psychological effects from my employment. I came anyway. The bracelet on my wrist had grown warmer each day since the demolition was announced, as if the part of me trapped in 1962 knew something was coming, was trying to warn me across decades. The first blow came at 8:47 a.m. A wrecking ball, massive and inexorable, swinging into the eastern wing where the pediatric ward had been. The impact was catastrophic. Brick and timber exploding outward, windows shattering, the structure collapsing in clouds of dust. And I felt it. Pain, sudden and overwhelming, not in my physical body, but in the part of me that existed elsewhere. As the pediatric ward collapsed, the space it occupied in the sustained moment fractured. I gasped, falling to my knees in the parking lot, aware in two places simultaneously. Here, watching demolition, and there in 1962 experiencing the operating theater shaking, destabilizing, as the anchor point was destroyed. Dr. Holbrook's voice echoed across the partition. What's happening? The structure is failing. The sustained moment requires the physical anchor. If the building falls... He didn't finish. Another swing of the wrecking ball, another section of wall collapsing, the pain intensified. I could feel the partition breaking down, could feel myself being pulled more fully into the sustained moment as its connection to the physical world severed. This wasn't freeing me. It was trapping me permanently in 1962. I forced myself to stand, to run toward the building despite the safety perimeter, despite the construction workers shouting at me to stay back. I had to reach the foundation, the one part they were preserving. If the sustained moment needed an anchor, maybe I could redirect it, ground it in something other than the full structure. Security guards intercepted me at the perimeter. I fought them, screaming about the foundation, about the 5th floor, about the eternal patience. They restrained me professionally, efficiently, one of them radioing for medical assistance while another checked if I was on drugs. Through the chaos, I saw her. Nurse Catherine Breyer, elderly again, standing near the construction zone, watching the demolition with tears streaming down her face. She met my eyes across the parking lot, and I understood. She was feeling it too. Every worker who'd ever split, who'd left part of themselves in the sustained moment, was experiencing the anchor's destruction. The hospital came down in stages, eastern wing first, then the central administrative building, then the western wing. Each collapse sent shockwaves through the partition. I felt myself fragmenting, the split becoming uncontrollable, my consciousness existing in multiple moments simultaneously. Kneeling in the parking lot, lying on the operating table, standing in the amphitheater, watching Holbrook panic back in my apartment, forward in some future I couldn't quite perceive. By noon, only the foundation remained. The building was reduced to rubble, decades of trauma compressed into broken brick and twisted metal. The construction crews broke for lunch, satisfied with the morning's progress. And I felt something change. The sustained moment, unanchored from the full structure, had contracted. Instead of existing throughout the building's 6 floors, it had compressed to its origin point, the sub-basement, the hidden surgical rooms where Dr. Holbrook had conducted his first experiments. The foundation preserved exactly that space. "No," I whispered, "no, they can't leave the foundation." But they would. They were required to. Historical preservation laws demanded it. A marker would be placed commemorating St. Mercy Hospital's existence. And beneath that marker, the sustained moment would continue, compressed but intact, still trapping souls in eternal procedures, still claiming anyone who got too close. I waited until the construction crews left for the day. Then I returned to the demolition site alone, climbing over the chain-link fence they'd erected, approaching the preserved foundation. It was concrete and stone, marked with spray-painted lines indicating where the historical marker would be placed. But I could feel the warmth emanating from it, could sense the sustained moment compressed beneath like a wound that refused to heal. I sat on the foundation as dusk fell, feeling through the partition to the part of me that existed in the operating theater. The amphitheater was smaller now, compressed. The spectral observers I'd thought were freed were still there, just contained in a tighter space, their eternal watching confined but unending. Dr. Holbrook sat in the center of the operating theater, no longer standing, no longer conducting procedures. Just sitting, surrounded by equipment that couldn't function without patients, staring at empty space. "They're gone," he said when he sensed my presence. "The patients we released, they moved on. But the moment persists, the trauma persists, and new patients keep arriving. Anyone who works here, anyone who gets too close to the sustained moment. The anchor is smaller now, but it's stronger, compressed, concentrated. I think we made it worse." "I think you're right," I said aloud to the foundation, to the space beneath it. "There has to be a way to end this," Holbrook continued. "Not just release individual souls, but collapse the entire moment. Let it finally finish happening instead of sustaining forever." An idea formed, terrible, risky, possibly my last conscious choice before the partition broke down completely. "Fire," I said. "The sustained moment exists because it's preserved, frozen in time, unable to progress. Fire destroys, fire changes, fire forces things to finish. The building is already demolished. Not the building, the moment itself. If I enter it fully, bring flame into the sustained space, force it to change, to progress beyond the frozen trauma." I didn't finish the thought, didn't acknowledge what it would mean for me. "You'd be there permanently," Holbrook said quietly. "If you enter fully to set the fire, you won't have enough presence in the current moment to return. You'll be trapped in 1962 experiencing the collapse. It might not even work, might just add your death to the sustained trauma. Or it might finally allow the moment to end," I said. 63 years is long enough, Doctor. Time to let it finish." I didn't go home that night. Didn't say goodbye to anyone or leave notes explaining what I was planning. I just sat on the foundation until midnight, then lay down on the concrete directly above where the sub-basement had been. And I let go of the partition. The transfer was immediate and absolute. One moment I was in 2025, lying on cold concrete. The next, I was in the operating theater, fully present, the distant awareness of my physical body fading to barely perceptible. The compressed amphitheater surrounded me, rows of eternal observers, equipment that had been running for decades, surgical lights casting harsh shadows. Dr. Holbrook stood near the operating table, no longer a monster, but just a man who'd made a terrible mistake and couldn't undo it. "I brought matches," I said, showing him the box I'd carried in my pocket that had somehow transferred across the partition with me. He looked at them, then at the amphitheater. "This space isn't physical. It's sustained consciousness, trauma made manifest. I don't know if fire works on memory. Only one way to find out." I walked through the amphitheater, striking matches, holding them to surgical equipment, to the observers' hospital gowns, to the fabric of the sustained moment itself. At first, nothing happened. The flames just flickered and died, unable to burn something that wasn't technically physical. Then one of the observers caught fire. Not their clothing, them. Their consciousness, their trapped awareness ignited. They opened their mouth in a scream, but instead of sound, light poured out. Brilliant, cleansing light. And then they were gone. Not released, transformed. Burned away, the trauma that sustained them consumed and ended. The fire spread, observer to observer, consciousness to consciousness, the sustained moment burning from within. The eternal patience ignited one by one, their decades of suffering finally terminating not in release but in transformation, in an ending that was also a beginning. Dr. Holbrook watched his life's work burn. "I thought I was preventing death," he whispered. "I thought I was helping." "I know," I said. The fire was approaching us now, consuming the amphitheater. I could feel heat that shouldn't exist in a non-physical space. "But it's over now. The research ends. The procedures end. Everything ends, doctor. That's not a failure, that's completion." He nodded slowly. Then he walked to the center of the operating theater and lay down on the table where so many had suffered, where he'd conducted procedures he'd believed would cure mortality but had only extended suffering. "Patient 1, he said softly. Dr. Emmett Holbrook, admitted June 14, 1962, 63 years of research. No cure for death discovered. Only methods of prevention, of life, of death, of all natural conclusions. I submit myself for the final procedure. Letting go." The fire reached him, consumed him. He burned like the others, his consciousness transforming from sustained awareness into something else, something I couldn't follow or understand. Then it was my turn. The fire surrounded me, and I felt my partition collapse completely. The part of me in 2025 vanished, not died, but stopped existing as a separate entity. I was entirely here, entirely in the sustained moment, experiencing its collapse and transformation. I burned. It hurt in ways that physical pain couldn't hurt. The dissolution of consciousness, the ending of awareness, the completion of existence I'd been delaying. But underneath the pain was something else. Relief. Release. The acceptance that things end, and endings aren't failures. The last thing I saw before my awareness transformed was the amphitheater collapsing, the surgical lights failing, the sustained moment of June 14, 1962, finally finishing its progression into history instead of remaining frozen in eternal present. Then I was gone. The overnight security position was posted in late June 2025. The job description was simple: monitor the historical marker site, prevent vandalism, maintain the perimeter fence. Night shift, Sunday through Thursday, $15 an hour. No experience necessary. We'll consider applicants with criminal records. 20 people applied. The first one hired was named Maria Gonzalez, 32, a single mother with a drug possession conviction that made legitimate employment nearly impossible. She needed the work. She couldn't afford to ask questions. On her first night, a representative from the property management company met her at the site. He handed her keys, a flashlight, and a 3-ring binder labeled Security Protocol. Inside were rules, 17 of them handwritten in different inks and hands. Rule number 1, do not stand on the foundation after midnight. Rule number 2, if you hear voices from beneath the ground, leave the site immediately. Rule number 3, if you find a hospital bracelet near the marker, do not touch it. Call the emergency number immediately. Are these serious? Maria asked. The representative didn't make eye contact. Follow them exactly. The previous security guard didn't. We found her on the foundation 3 weeks later, catatonic. She's in psychiatric care now. He left quickly, his car disappearing down the access road with disturbing urgency. Maria stood alone at the site, reading the rules by flashlight, looking at the preserved foundation and its new historical marker. St. Mercy Hospital, 1923-1987, in memory of those who served and were served. Beneath the ground, barely perceptible, she heard something that might have been wind through underground spaces, or might have been the sound of surgical equipment still humming, still waiting. The sustained moment had collapsed, transformed, ended. But trauma has momentum, and sometimes endings aren't final, just delayed.